Good morning and welcome to Teaching and Learning TV. Teaching and Learning TV is an initiative of the University of KwaZulu-Natal Teaching and Learning Conference, and the Teaching and Learning Conference is actually in its 10th year of existence. We are here today in beautiful Durban with a gorgeous view of the ocean behind us. Today's panel is on distinguished teaching, and we have with us, we're very privileged to have with us, distinguished teacher recipients, and it is my pleasure to introduce them to you this morning. So first up, we have Rosemary Quilling, who is a senior lecturer in information systems and technology. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thanks for having me here. It's really lovely to have the opportunity, I think, to meet with other people and discuss teaching. To me, teaching is a way of life. And I think one of the things that I'd like to discuss on the panel today is actually looking into challenging dominant narratives. Things like the theme of the conference, which is research, perhaps being put opposite teaching in some academic circles. But that leads to other things, like the idea of face-to-face teaching versus technology, like the idea of curriculums that are colonial rather than transformed. And I think that's quite an important issue in all of our classrooms.
Great, and who better to talk about that than someone from Information Systems and Technology. So welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you.
And next up we have Professor Thabo Msibi. Professor Msibi is an associate professor in the School of Education here also at University of KwaZulu-Natal, focusing on curriculum studies. And he's a distinguished teacher recipient of 2015, together with Rosemary. Both of them are 2015 distinguished teacher recipients. Thabo, it's always a pleasure to have you here.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to engage this morning on transgressive teaching, which is what I focus on in terms of my own teaching philosophy. And of course, as you know, my broad area of work is within gender and sexuality studies within the context of curriculum. So I would like to engage on what does it mean to be a post-apartheid university that is trying to decolonize, and given the space that the students have actually been pushing us to, I want us to engage on what it means to teach transgressively.
And a topic after my own heart. So thank you, Thabo. Always lovely to chat with you.
Fantastic.
And then we have Professor Micheal Savage, who's a Distinguished Teacher Award recipient of 2014. He's a professor of agrometeorology, and I got that right. Professor Micheal Savage, welcome.
Thank you. My focus has been on how do you teach and research something that firstly students have never met in their lives before, and secondly that are invisible. Between you and me there are many, many invisible things which form the focus of the modules that we teach. And how do you explain to them those invisible things, and in terms that don't exist in their language? So it's the invisibility, it's the language issue, it's also getting to visual literacy. Because you have to pluck out those things that are invisible and now make them visible. And in particular, using live data where you try and bring what is happening outside, the invisible outside, bring it inside for them to see in some way.
Well, thank you. I think you should speak to the theologians. They also teach on the invisible. Thank you, Micheal. And then we have a distinguished teacher. She's the ancestor of this group from the year 2011, Professor Nyna Amin, who's also an associate professor in the School of Education in curriculum studies as well. Nyna, always a pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning to you all, and it's such a nice opportunity to talk about the things that concern me and that I think are important in teaching, notwithstanding all the important issues raised by my three distinguished friends here. But certainly for me, the issue of discomfort, of disruption and destabilization, I think are really important, whether you're destabilizing the way people think, the way their belief systems, where they come from, what they think the future is about, are really important, because I think learning has some pain attached to it. It has some loss, and it encompasses a lot of memorializing, memorizing, and how does one actually get into that. And it draws a lot from my own doctoral work, which is around the issues of knowing and not knowing, and the paradoxical nature of knowing, and what we profess to know about our students, about teaching, and what we really don't know. So those are the things that I think kind of structure and underpin my approach to teaching at university.
Well, thank you. I'm sure that our audience would agree that we have a really distinguished panel here of distinguished teachers, and it's an absolute pleasure to be talking with all of you this morning on so many diverse and different, D seems to be the word here, right? The letter. So diverse and different interests in this group. But I think given our current situation, particularly in our higher education context in South Africa, what's happening in our own university at the moment, it might be interesting to begin precisely at that point, right? What does it mean to be a disruptive teacher in a context where we seem to be bombarded by very disruptive students? Anyone want to open up that discussion? What does it mean to be a disruptive teacher, challenging dominant narratives, all the things we're kind of making the invisible visible in a context of disruptive students, right? We want to center on teaching and learning. So,
well, I think part of the issue is, and in this sense, I think probably all of us, from what we've already said, is we understand where the students are coming from in some senses. Because if I just think about my teaching, and it is a paradox. I love the word that Nyna has introduced, because you said also that we may discuss the issue of what it means to be a distinguished teacher. Well, to be a distinguished teacher, you can't, in many senses, you can't be the norm, because then you're not distinguished. Okay, so in a sense, just by the definition, you have to step outside the norm. You have to be doing something different. I rather like the term positive deviance, because you're different, but not in a necessarily a damaging way or a negative way. You're just challenging, and I think that's the issue. We are challenging, each of us, and everything we're doing, we're challenging something about the space that we're given and the actors coming into that space. And I think that's what our students are doing. I think the challenge becomes around the issue of how that is actually, how they use their agency and what the impact of that is. And I think that's a different issue. But I think it's the same challenge. I think we all sit with these challenges of, you want to step outside, but as soon as you step outside mainstream, there's a level at which if you step too far outside mainstream, perhaps then you only have chaos. And then, our whole initiative of higher education stands to be threatened.
Are we in that space of chaos, Thabo? Are you a positive deviant?
I am a positive deviant to some extent, but and I think I agree to a large extent with what Rosemary is saying. But I think we are in an interesting space, and I will speak about this at greater length on Thursday, because I think the biggest problem that we have currently is the sort of the very rigid positioning from the students and also from the managers in relation to how they are engaging with each other around the issues that have been raised. And certainly, as Rosemary has indicated, being aware of the struggles that students go through every single day in order for them to access higher education is one of the biggest drivers for, I think, it's me in terms of how I teach in the classroom. Bell Hook's notion that I was speaking about earlier of transgressive teaching is located in the idea of understanding teaching as not just a process of imparting knowledge, but rather as a process that is deeply political. And if you understand teaching as a political process, you understand that you do not subscribe to exactly what Rosemary is speaking about. You don't subscribe to the norm. You are anti-norm, anti the norm in a sense. And your aim is to disrupt whatever it is that the students bring into the classroom, but also you also have to disrupt yourself. So it's that discomfort that Nyna also was speaking about, that the classroom space becomes something that is uncomfortable, and through that discomfort, then learning can occur. I don't think, to go back to your question, we are in a crisis moment yet. And I'll tell you why I don't think we're in a crisis moment yet.
Hey, the announcement's going to be made.
Absolutely.
The announcement of the fee increases. For
So
those.
I think at the point at which we start making that announcement, then we may be in a crisis moment. I think there's one of my biggest concerns is this construction of the student who is paranoid. And I'm worried about that, because as academics we have created this student who is out there torching buildings, whom you cannot reason with. Yet when you go and you have an engagement with students, you get a completely different sense. Because what we do as distinguished teachers is to connect to the very essence of who students are. It's actually trying to understand where they are coming from. And if we are going to have this notion of this unthinking student who's out there to be just basically torching buildings, we miss our own, not maybe our own, but we miss the project of introducing a political form of education, a moment of disruption. And I think that for me is critical.
But I hear what you're saying, Thabo. I'm wondering though, this notion of disruption, I want to expand a little bit on it. Disrupting what students know. And yet it strikes me that in this decolonial moment, or the calls for decolonization, certainly what we're being asked is not so much to disrupt what they know, but to affirm their knowledge, to affirm what it is they come with, because the perception has been that so much of what they bring into the classroom is sidelined in favor of a more Eurocentric model, a more Western idea of what knowledge is, right? And I wonder, Nyna, Micheal, if you might have ideas on that.
I think maybe to start a little before this, for me, what students are doing at the moment is certainly a cry for dignity. I think for a long time there has been such an undignified response to them through our teaching, through our communication, through the way we engage with students. And certainly for students of color, they still do not feel that they are welcome, that in many ways we sent out the messages that we don't want them there. And when you feel unloved, when you feel unwanted, this might just be one of the ways why they engage in the way they do, because they start off the position, as you said, in this very inflexible way, is because they haven't been listened to for a long time. Whether their grievances are authentic, whether they require listening to is immaterial. But the thing is that somebody has to engage with them before we've reached the point that we are at the moment. So in my classroom, I have to go to pains to ensure that they understand that discomfort and disruption does not equate to indignity. That it's a way of bringing dignity back through the back door, if you want to. But really not so much to affirm their knowledge or mine, but how we bring those into contestation so that we can emerge with some wisdom. Now that kind of approach to teaching and learning is certainly not comfortable for myself or the students. Many of them leave my class very angry. I have to wait some time for a year or two before the students come back with an appreciation of the approach. So this is not the way to, for the populist way of doing things. It certainly is not a way to get students to like me or to like the content, but to engage with it in such a contested way and to tell them that it's all right to disagree. And maybe in those moments which Rancia says is not just a moment, it's a momentum, is to allow for them to see that you can do disruption and discomfort with dignity. I think that's the important thing for me. So I don't want to say it's for everyone. And remember, I still say, I really don't know where it's going to go. Because what I think is important might not be. What students think they bring into the classroom might also not be. We really don't know. And I think it's about appreciating an unknowing moment, which might lead to something else. That's the way I see it. And I certainly don't think it's an approach for everybody.
Certainly, and this is why I think I would like to get Michael's take on some of this, because a lot of this is a philosophy, it's approach to teaching, and it works well within the humanities, the social sciences, disciplines like education, etc. How does that work in a classroom where you want to impart scientific knowledge, right? There's the idea that science is almost immutable, the idea that science is you have to teach in a way that imparts knowledge. It's not so much about disrupting knowledge, some people would argue, it's about passing on that knowledge. Or is my understanding wrong, Micheal? What's your sense?
It is, in a sense, disrupting knowledge, because students have, at the beginning of the module, incredible frustration about not knowing enough about the world that they live in. And they realize that lack of knowledge is going to be an important thing for them as they move through their careers. And it's frustration, it's fear as well, because it's an unknown. And if you don't know what it is, you're a little bit fearful about this thing. And it must be very fearful coming in front of a new module that you've never met in your life before. You can't pronounce the name of the module.
Even the professors can't do it.
And you don't even know what it is. And the way I approach it is firstly with empathy. That's the most important thing, is empathy. That you have to appreciate that there is this fear that exists. And your first job is to get rid of that fear. And to take examples that are very simple, that they have experienced, and engage with them directly. And it's with this empathy and engagement, and that's where you can hit a home run. And when I say engage, I mean direct engagement, walking around the class, even to the back of the room, and asking direct questions. Did you walk here? What was the weather like? And then showing them the weather. Showing them the invisible elements of the weather, the numbers that the instruments generate, the graph that is generating, and now they're starting to get some experience. And they realize the more they experience of the natural environment and mentally make a recording of it, the greater the understanding of it will be.
So it is experiential learning, right?
It's experiential
about learning
learning
through what you see and touch and feel, and I think there's a saying that's attributed and not necessarily been confirmed to the poet Yeats, that education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And what I'm hearing from the distinguished panel is that all of you in some way are more interested in the lighting of the fire. Putting out fires maybe sometimes, but the lighting of the fire, would that be a correct assessment?
I think, there's, I find myself sometimes living in a space where I try and connect to things metaphorically. It's just a way how I think, okay? And to me, teaching is a way of life. I mean, and I think sometimes that's the problem, is that we remove things from the real. We try and abstract them like it's something rather elevated, that professors do.
But isn't that the bane of our existence as academics?
No,
we're supposed to make something as abstract as possible.
That's the challenge, and I think we have to reverse that. And I think what we've all spoken about, and the image I would use is, for those of you who grew up around a TV, or for those who have children, there was Barney, the purple dinosaur, that's, children's story. and that is sharing is caring. And to me, well, what is learning and education? It's about the sharing. It's about the sharing of knowledge, it's the sharing of skills, it's experience, it's a conversation, it's two ways. And I think that's what we've all spoken about, is the fact that there's actually a sense of caring about the individual. And I think that's the thing. So to me, for instance, in teaching, and I think we've all made a reference to it in some way or another, is this idea that you're actually concerned about the individual. Yes, we're concerned about our specific fields and disciplines, but actually it's that individual that comes into the space. And I don't just look at imparting knowledge or skills. I'm not just building a professional. And I think that may be one of the problems with our view of higher education that's got all commodified, is that, you know, we're producing a product.
Yes.
Well, I think we are producing a product, but perhaps not the one that's under discussion. I think the product we're producing is a well-rounded individual, an active
We should be
citizen.
producing, exactly.
You know, so
A critical citizen.
Exactly.
certainly,
And so
yes.
when I engage with my class, you know, yes, there's content. We've always got content of some form. But I think it's the other things that come along with the content. So the discussion has to be broader. And I think perhaps that's the issue, is do we see that person? The movie Avatar, with purple people, they had, and it struck me, you can hear it struck me, and it stuck with me ever since, is their greeting in that movie was, I see you.
Yes, I remember that.
And that is, I think, the thing. Do you actually see those people in your classroom, or are they just an aggregate? Are they just a herd that you're moving? And I think that's what we've all been talking about.
And
I
that's
wonder,
really,
I just wonder to what extent the discourse of caring displaces the care for learning. Because I think if we spend too much time on this emotional care and so on, I mean, frequently I would disrupt students by asking, so why would you pay? So maybe I should first state that I teach master's students mainly, so I'm not with the undergrads. They're much older persons, a little more mature, they're working and so on. And I would ask them, why would you pay so much to come to university and expect me to care for you emotionally?
No, but I don't think it's an emotional caring.
No, because it's often sort of very difficult to accept critique of the writing and of the research and so on. And of course, teaching research means you're teaching worldviews. So perhaps it kind of lends itself to this disruption and discomfort and so on, in which I'm challenging the dominant worldview that you're coming in. The so-called, what you might call norms, but I would say that we're trying to displace one norm with another norm.
But I heard
So we
so
never
much in the conversation, the words care, compassion, love.
But
I
I'm
mean, what
thinking
is
about
the space? What is the place of love?
But where is it placed?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it should be absent.
No, but
So
how?
where is
How?
it placed?
Yes.
Is it caring for the intellect, caring for the emotion, caring for the person?
Is it
so I think
nurturing?
there's too much slippage of what we mean by caring.
Yeah.
And
agree.
I think students have to come to understand that teaching for learning is a deeper kind of, not a deeper, but it's a different kind of a care.
And I think Bell Hooks picks up on this, right?
Yes.
In transgressive teaching, the idea of the act of teaching is almost something spiritual. Thabo?
Yes, she does. And in fact, she is opposed to the idea of just going into the classroom and expecting professors and teachers to just be bringing their minds. She says that you know, we are. It's almost like we've got disembodied minds in the classroom, because there's this erasure of the self as a teacher. So the teacher is not seen as somebody who is a person who has compassion, who has a sense of spirituality in coming into engaging with the students, but rather as somebody who abstractly has this knowledge to impart on individuals. And this is problematic, she argues, because we have a political almost that we bring into this learning space. And I think, you see, it's a bit, this notion of care for me is a bit tricky, because on the one hand, You can have a caring that, that demands that the intellectual engagement that we have in the classroom be reduced to an element of just mothering. And, you know, let's all sing Kumbaya and let's all be happy. And I think
once we go that route, we actually are doing our students a disservice. And I think both colleagues actually agree on this, because in essence, when we speak about care, it is in many ways what Nyna is speaking about. It is about this intellectual caring. But I would also argue it is also a political care, in that we have an obligation, and I often say this, and for me it is a moral obligation, that when our students come into a learning space, in a post-apartheid moment, in a post-conflict moment, Jonathan Anson would say, we have this obligation to make students understand that we are political, social beings that are carrying their own histories as they come into the classroom, and that the teacher, him or herself, also carries a particular history that in many ways shapes the type of thinking that gets delivered or even engaged with in the classroom. So in a sense, we have an obligation to engage with uncomfortable forms of knowing. Or knowledges that people would not ordinarily engage with. So, in what way are we making, for instance, agrometeorology? Now I got it right earlier. Now
you haven't taught him.
You haven't taught me well. In what way do we interpret it in a political context, linking it to students' experiences and history? And I think you were speaking about that, Micheal, earlier. So it's not just, I beg your pardon, just abstractly presenting this knowledge. It is about connecting with the students' histories, their experiences, their own being, and actually getting them to realize that,
and moving it forward.
And moving it forward, you know, moving that forward, because you come into this classroom as somebody who is a person who has multiple forms of being. It's not just this person who's just focused on getting this knowledge, but actually it's a wider spectrum.
That's right. And doesn't that require, Micheal, then really an almost commitment to being interdisciplinary? So while you have this discipline knowledge that you need, the content, right, that you need to impart, which itself is a contested word, especially in this space, and so I'm using it advisedly. But while you have that knowledge, that pail that you need to fill, you also need to draw on knowledges from that are outside of your discipline, both philosophical and perhaps, and that's why I think I prefer the word transdisciplinary, because it's about using the
crossing over,
right? Micheal, has that been your sense too, that you have to draw widely?
Yeah, if I were to lecture just agrometeorology, I would be dead. The students would be really, really bored, see no application for this thing, and divorce it and say, I don't want to go there. So the way we confront it is we say, it's not a pigeonhole, and we go outside there and we stand on soil, we breathe air, we see people, and we see this, that, and the next thing. And we have to go across disciplines.
Right.
There's no doubt.
So it's embodied. It's a very embodied pedagogy.
Yeah. We take examples from other disciplines. And they might get cross with us for taking their examples in our lectures, but we have no problem with that at all.
Right.
And you have to do that.
Right.
And the live data that we use typifies that as well, where we go across disciplines. Yeah.
Nyna?
Sarojini, I want to ask you a question. I think we've been silent because you're a distinguished teacher yourself, a recipient in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us about your pedagogy.
Hey, we see faces. Yeah, I'm the host of the show. She totally disrupted the show.
And that's the point.
That's the point. Yes, I think that phrase that's attributed to the poet Yeats is something that I've reflected on a lot. The idea of education being the filling of the pail is not just the filling of the pail, but the lighting of a fire. And what I found, though, I have to say, I've had to revise that since my first application, where
I wrote this teaching statement, because what I found is it's not either or. It's not the dichotomy that statement almost seems to convey, that you either do the filling of the pail or the lighting of the fire. But I think in our higher education context, currently you have to have both. And particularly in my own discipline in gender studies, what happens is that the students come with that fire blazing already. They want to change the world. They've got that. And I have to actually tone it. That my job, I see, is to say, okay, I like this activist, stance. Everybody wants to come and change the world. Now, what do we need to learn to be able to do that? How do we theorize? How does our action get undergirded by solid theorizing, so that it's not empty action, but our activism in the world, our desire to transform, is always undergirded by solid understanding of what does that mean. What does it mean to transform the world? So I think I've sort of moved a little bit from just this dichotomy, and it came a little bit starkly to me the other day when there was a conversation happening on a social media platform about the burning books. Right, and this is a burning topic at the moment. And someone said, made a casual statement about people care more about books than they do about bodies. And I read a really interesting piece that said, don't put me in that box. It's not an either or. Just because I care about burning books doesn't mean I don't care about black bodies. And actually, I would go further to say it's a fallacy, actually, to say, and an insult, to say that if you care about burning books, you don't care about black bodies, because the assumption is that black bodies don't care about books. Absolutely. Right? And so for me, it's about how to to create a classroom that's non-dichotomous, non-binary. My aim is always to teach about the fluidity of everything we know.
And I think that's so important, because the other important aspect is for students to know that it's okay not to know everything. It's okay not to understand. It's okay to leave the classroom a little bit confused.
Now, can you imagine how difficult that is in a religious studies classroom?
Well, they start off confused in any case.
Because everybody knows.
Yes, yes.
So, well, it's exactly that in research, because all the time during lectures, students are trying to convert me to their religion.
Oh, really?
So it's that kind, and I'm trying to convert them to the religion of research. So we have those kind, but it's fine. I mean, I always tell them it's okay to go and leave a little confused. We'll try to sort it out the next, because I think they need to be assured that we are there to support over and beyond the classroom, that you can come back, but all of us need to know that the future is uncertain. But it's about how we use our wisdom to navigate uncertainty. That is important.
So uncertainty is an epistemological category in a way, right?
Well, also, I think, I'm sorry, I'm not picking up on the uncertainty, but I'm picking up on the thing I think you were saying about, how do we bring things that appear dichotomous, closer to each other. And I think one of the disservices that might have been done in this country, I mean, it may sound almost a bit heretical to say it, but, this idea of a rainbow nation.
Absolutely.
Okay, the rainbow nation, to me, initially when I heard it, I must admit it sounded so beautiful. Sort of like, yes, bunnies and unicorns, okay? But actually, the thing is, to me, and it may only be in my mind, but it directly links to race and separations of things. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that, there's a natural fear of the other, somebody who somehow fits into a different category to you, whether it's gender or race or religion or any of the others. And I think if we can start to bring each other closer in ways, just the understanding that we actually have things in common, and potentially a lot more things in common than actually divide us. And I think, the comment that Nyna was saying about the knowing and the not knowing, that actually, just because you're a lecturer doesn't mean that you're all knowing or even that you know. It's that issue. And with our students, I mean, you can imagine, I'm going to be talking tomorrow, and I've actually chosen to do a non-tech type of talk, and so I'll have pictures up on the wall, and one of the pictures is of my honours class. I just took last year's one, and you know, we're so in that space where race is so sensitive, and if you look at that picture, I'm the only white face, you know, in a dark class, and yet, you know, we share more than actually what divides us. And I think if you spoke to the student, again, we're dealing with more senior students, they're at 4th year, okay? And it's not that we haven't had the discussions about where we differ, but we've come to a space where we understand where the challenges are things that we share, that the same things that worry them or that they fear are things that worry and I fear as well. And I think that's important. So as much as, and I think maybe what we're starting to say as distinguished teachers is that, you know, the dichotomies are the problems, whereas the spaces where we can bring things into conversation with each other. So the disruption is as critical as care, however you defined it, what we have in common and what differs, that's actually learning. All of those spaces are where the learning
Well, that's
can
what I
happen.
want to touch on, is difference necessarily. Can difference be a productive space?
Well, this is
isn't that the idea?
If I may, absolutely. To a large extent, I think I agree with what Rosemary is talking about, but I would flip it the opposite direction. So I mean, I think that, as far as I'm concerned, there is this need for us to try and find commonality and common ground, but not to erase difference. Because for me, in fact, what we should be accepting is difference as the norm, as opposed to similarity as the norm. Once you get to a space of understanding that difference is actually what is normative for everybody, then the need to actually read Rosemary as a white person is no longer there, because I understand that everybody in the space is different. I'm going to be, I don't have certain expectations, certain of sameness, you know, because if you think about how all the most forms of oppressions occur, it is mainly because we're trying to force each other to be the same. I mean, and you know, I work in the space of same-sex sexuality and queerness, and part of appreciating queerness is this idea that actually, you know what, everything is fluid and everything is queer, and in fact, that becomes a starting point, because I don't necessarily have to expect somebody to be like me in order for me to respond to their own experience, but rather that you know, I acknowledge that I'm different to them, and we're all going to be different, but it's actually existing within that difference and finding ways of supporting each other
productively,
productively.
Yes.
Exactly.
And you know, it's interesting how this Rainbow Nation idea gets propagated from school already upwards. And I remember an incident with my now 12-year-old in a school where his teacher in one of the meetings said to me, I've since taken him out of that school, but said to me, I think Ryan might be experiencing problems at school with the other boys. I said, oh, why? She says, because they call him brown. So I said, well, he is. And she says, no, in our school we teach children not to see color. I said, why? Why do you teach children not to see color? I think seeing color is important. We are different color, and seeing it's when you discriminate on the basis of the difference that it's a problem, right? But we should be teaching our children that we are different, and that it's okay to be different. It's what we do with that difference, right? And so if we have students coming in from that school background where they all want to be together and sing Kumbaya and not see difference, what do we get in the classroom in the university is the question.
Yeah, we're talking about differences, and the one difference, it's a different aspect of difference that I want to talk about, and that is language. I know there's a session on language. I give my students an ethically cleared questionnaire. And one of the questions provocatively asks, do you mind being lectured in English?
Do you mind?
Do you mind?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a problem with being lectured in English? And surprisingly enough, nearly 80% of them say, we do not mind being lectured in English, in spite of the fact that more than 2/3 of them are isiZulu mother tongue. And it got me thinking, this question here developed over years, and that's why we ended up including that question. And it got me thinking, why do they not mind being lectured in English?
Are they giving you a public transcript that they think you want to hear?
No.
Maybe. Is
So
there a hidden transcript?
I went and bought an English isiZulu dictionary. And I looked at the terms that we were dealing with, the scientific terms. Dewpoint. There's no isiZulu word for dewpoint.
Oh.
Momentum, impulse, energy, power, all have one meaning in isiZulu, amandla. But technically, in my field, they are entirely different. Energy flux, energy, amandla.
Mm.
There's no distinction. And it got me to realize that maybe there's been language, what I called language stagnation, where because of the past, the historical past, when technology was adopted, it was only adopted by certain sets of society, because they were the ones that were allowed to or disallowed to. And those that were disallowed that technology, like going to school and experiencing an overhead projector. In Afrikaans, the term for overhead projector, I think there was a national competition for the term in Afrikaans for an overhead projector. Now, rural schools, overhead projectors were only 10 or 15 years later. So no term existed in isiZulu for overhead projector.
It's interesting because in the next panel we're going to be dealing with precisely this, about what it means to intellectualize languages.
Yeah.
Right? And how certain languages have simply not followed that path for various reasons, but what does it mean to have that project here at the University of KwaZulu-Natal? Because there is a project of that,
Well,
right?
especially in the context of what we speak about when we speak about decolonization.
Decolonization.
Because,
Yeah.
I mean, it is absolutely pivotal that we start engaging in a process of actually creating these concepts.
Yes.
And because we have this history that Michael's speaking about, that in a sense did not dignify isiZulu in academic spaces.
Exactly.
So we have again and this moral obligation as a country to start developing these terms and to build
And to intellectualize our African languages, certainly in the way Afrikaans developed, right?
What we did as a result of that is we extracted in a spreadsheet all the terms in the subject matter that didn't exist in the isiZulu dictionary. And we started giving project groups a project saying, please come up with terms.
Right.
And they had to come up with their own terms. Column 1 was first stab and the second stab and the third stab. And every year we hand that around to the class. And some would come to us and say, you know, that really technically is not the correct term.
It's not the and I think there's so many different facets, right, in the translation, that it's not just the literal, but it is the conceptual. How do you convey the conceptual rather than just the technical? But having said that, we are now actually preparing very well for our next panel, which is on languages. So thank you, Michael, for leading us well into that. Thank you to our audience. Thank you once again to our distinguished teacher panel, Rosemary, Quilling, Thabo Msibi, Michael Savage, and Nyna Amin. It's been a pleasure having you here, and we will see you at the next panel. Hello and welcome to Teaching and Learning TV. We are very pleased this afternoon to be joined by Dr. Rabi Dunpat from the University of KwaZulu-Natal Teaching and Learning Office, and Rabi is the Director of Teaching and Learning at that office. We are continuing a discussion that we began earlier on distinguished teachers. Dr. Dunpat is quite involved in the process of developing the idea of Distinguished Teachers Awards, both at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and now nationally. And we're going to be discussing that a little bit this afternoon. Welcome, Ravi.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. And this is your initiative, actually, so it's lovely to have you in
Well,
studio.
actually, interestingly, yes, I have been the chair of this conference for the past many years, but always resisted having to go on.
Yes.
On a studio.
Yes.
But delighted to be here anyway.
Yes, and congratulations on the 10th year anniversary of this conference. I think it's a wonderful achievement.
Yes, certainly it's a watershed moment for us, and we'll soon be announcing the next 10 years.
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to see what that's going to look like. So, Ravi, tell us a little bit about the Distinguished Teachers Awards at maybe first at UKZN and what the University Teaching and Learning Office intends to achieve by initiating these awards, and then maybe perhaps we can move the discussion to nationally.
Yes, certainly. So I think it's sort of now a common sense that there's a perennial complaint from academics that research is rewarded, in some instances overly, and that our core business as academics is really about teaching, which receives little or no recognition. So we've had a tradition at UKZN for the past several years where we identify top performing academics who are distinguished in their particular disciplines and who takes teaching seriously alongside research. And what we've been trying to do is blur the dichotomy between the two, which is not always easy because there exists a further common sense in the academy that research deserves more in terms of recognition and in terms of monetary reward. So our Distinguished Teacher program does to a large extent attempt to remedy that. We offer a fairly handsome reward for a distinguished teacher, for up to 4 distinguished teachers who meet the criteria, and the reward enables academics to pursue further research agendas, and we are particularly encouraging of academics to invest some of their energy in developing younger emerging academics.
Right.
And that's I think one of our distinguishing features of UKZN academics. But it's more than just receiving monetary reward and award. It's about opening doors of opportunity. Our distinguished teachers go on nationally to qualify for national grants. Many of them are called upon to do keynote addresses and conduct workshops, and so it does definitely promote our academics and promotes the university as well. Now, interestingly, over the past 5 odd years or so, UKZN academics also feature in the National Teaching Excellence Award. Now, I'm privileged to be on the national selection panel of the Teaching Excellence Award, which is hosted by the Council on Higher Education and HELTASA, the Higher Education Teaching and Learning Association of Southern Africa, that is. Excuse me. So over the past 4 years, we've had every year a UKZN awardee on the National Teaching Excellence Award.
Which is a lovely accolade.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't think any other institution has won that accolade. So, excuse me. So you perhaps want to know how
yes, and so I'm quite interested in what is the process that is followed to enable one to get nominated or receive this award, but also I think perhaps might you conjecture that UKZN is more has quite a rigorous process that enables
them to be recognized even nationally, right? There must be
Absolutely.
something about the process. So
Absolutely.
say a little bit more
Yeah,
about the process.
I certainly endorse the view that UKZN's process is rigorous. And so let's just say something about the process. So at UKZN, you have to be nominated either by a peer or by students. You then have to assemble and submit a portfolio, and that alone is a thoroughly rigorous process.
A teaching portfolio.
A teaching portfolio.
Right. And what goes into this portfolio? What's the...
Well, I think as a former recipient of the award, you actually are in a better position to say something about what goes into the portfolio, because you actually have assembled one.
Yes. Would you like a glass of
Yes, thank you.
water?
So please do say something about the teaching portfolio.
Yes. Well, when it was actually at UKZN, when you apply for promotion, you have to do both a teaching portfolio and a research portfolio, develop one. And in developing that teaching portfolio for promotion, you realize that the criteria is as rigorous for the award as it is for the promotion. So it almost makes sense to submit the portfolio for the award. But basically, if I recall correctly, what you asked to expand on and explain in your portfolio is your approach and your philosophy to teaching, your methods of teaching, your methods of assessment, if you've engaged in the scholarship of teaching and learning, and how you share your best teaching practice with others. Those are the most significant categories,
Yes.
I think. And so it's quite rigorous. And the portfolio is not just a teaching portfolio, but it has to be based on evidence. So it's an evidence-led portfolio. So you don't make a claim that, you create a democratic classroom, for example, without saying how you actually do that and providing evidence of that, whether that's through assessment or whatever. So it is indeed, at least as a past recipient, I know that it is quite a rigorous process.
So I should say then that Sarojini is one of our distinguished teachers who won the award at UKZN and went on to win the national award.
I didn't win it, I had a commendation.
Well, as a panelist on the National Teaching Excellence Award, there's quite a fine line between who wins the award and who gets the commendation. The fact of the matter is there's room for 5 awards. So it's quite a tough one when we make the call. And for me, if you get the award, whether it's a commendation or the actual award, there is little difference. It's a huge honor.
Well, that's a nice accolade
Yes.
to have. Nice to know. But Ravi, you were saying earlier that you use your, which is not a very nice thing to say, but you do, the distinguished teachers, this panel in a way is an offshoot of the distinguished teachers, almost the trajectory that we follow and when you were talking earlier about the various doors that then open up and the various opportunities. It's about putting your distinguished teaching into practice.
That's exactly it. So just to return to an earlier question that you asked about what is the process at national level, pretty much the same as it happens domestically. The Teaching Excellence Award is hosted once again by the Council on Higher Education and the Higher Education Teaching and Learning Association, and they call for nominations. So institutions are expected to nominate their best fellows. And in some instances where universities have an established award like UKZN, then automatically the recipients go forward.
Yes.
They submit their teaching portfolio, which is assessed, etc. Other institutions which don't have an established tradition of awarding teachers may submit whom they consider to be top performing teachers at the university. So once the panel comprises 8 individuals from different institutions, I represent the Council on Higher Education as its external member on the panel.
Okay, all right. And the process of examination, the criteria,
Yes.
if you like, of,
Yeah.
you know, with the awards.
Right.
Could you say
So
a little bit
in
more
the
about
first
that?
instance, as you mentioned earlier, candidates have to submit a portfolio. And the portfolio is subjected to very rigorous scrutiny. And the portfolios are rated, and that's the initial shortlisting mechanism. So 10 individuals are shortlisted by the panel. So the panel first has the opportunity to screen each of the portfolios. I can assure you it's an extremely difficult task. And then we meet and we have a powwow about which of the 10, which of the candidates should make the shortlist. And then the candidates are informed and they have to present themselves for an interview. And typically it's a Skype interview.
Yes.
Because
which is not ideal.
Which is not ideal. Yes, yes. It's not ideal, but given the difficult lives that academics face, you know, asking a day out of their lives is not always not always possible. So at the Skype interview, individuals are expected to demonstrate, as you indicated, what their teaching philosophies are, which is a very important indicator for us. And this is what separates the technicians from the intellectuals. And the panel is keen to know, at a pragmatic level, how you translate the teaching philosophy into pedagogy.
Right.
And pedagogy that is context relevant, that's responsive to context. And some of us are particularly interested in what you do as a distinguished teacher to further your discipline, to further the cause of the scholarship of teaching and learning, and more importantly, how you use this to advance the academy, to build capacity, to share expertise, to develop young expertise, young academics. And yes, so there are 5, and it's quite a strenuous and not always pleasant exercise when you have to, you know, the cutoff points is 5 awards, when you know the 6th one is actually an award.
So I imagine that must be quite a difficult task. But the just about the portfolio itself again, and particularly about the approach to teaching, for example, do you think that people who have an education background or who are more familiar with theories within education have a distinct advantage, or do you find that people with disciplinary expertise are equally capable to theorize their scholarship of teaching and learning? Or do you find scholarship emerging from the portfolio and those statements, or do you find it's mostly narrative and descriptive?
That's actually a really good question, and it's a dilemma that we face all the time. And yes, it is true that education specialists know the vocabulary, they know the discourse, and they can bandy it around quite freely. But the real test is in the interview. So going back to the portfolio, it's very important, for me at least as a panelist, that you are very candid and honest in constructing a portfolio, rather than attempting to portray a particular image of yourself.
And concepts,
because it really does show in the interview. And there are those who don't know the discourse, but who embody the values and the principles of good teaching by virtue of what they do and how they do it. So that's the leveler for me, the interview. And I would say the majority of recipients are non-education people in the academy.
So it's not so much about how well you can theorize what you do, but more about a genuine and authentic reflection and critical self-reflection on your teaching practice, right? That's what makes a distinguished teacher. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience.
So perhaps I should add one other, if I may.
Of course.
So an offshoot of the National Teaching Excellence Award is the Teaching Advancement Fellowship.
Oh yes, of course. Yes.
Right. Would you like me to say something about that?
Please do. I'm very interested in this.
Right.
Yes.
So one of the initiatives of HLTASA, the CHE, and the University of Johannesburg Chair of Teaching and Learning is the Teaching Advancement at Universities Fellowship. And this comprises a group of distinguished teachers from across the country, those who have received either the national award or the local university award or both. And they come together in a year and a half, a year to 18 months residential fellowship all over the country, where they are exposed to networking opportunities with other distinguished fellows, but more importantly, they're exposed to academics, international academics who are accomplished in their fields. And these week-long sessions are very, very intense and project-based. And we've just completed the first round of the Teaching Excellence Fellowship, and I'm privileged to be an advisor on the program.
Yes.
And the fellowship, because of its success, will probably move on to its second phase.
Lovely.
And a new cohort of academics will be selected.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the work of that those fellows have proven to be productive in
Absolutely.
terms of the synergies it's created.
The synergies during the residential sessions, the emerging new communities of practice from within. But more recently at UKZN, what we've tried to do is build regional collaboration. So we've just come from a week-long session where fellows from other provinces have tried to build a regional collaboration amongst 3 or 4 universities.
Right.
And that has proved to be most rewarding, that we're diffusing this new spirit and energy of scholarship.
Which is lovely,
Yeah.
which is lovely. And I think the idea of research fellows have gained currency,
That's
over the
right.
years. And I think teaching fellows, this initiative certainly is going to do its bit for entrenching that notion.
Absolutely. It would be somewhat naive, though, to expect that teaching can exist without research.
Of course, of course.
And it's that naivety that we're trying to challenge.
The constant dichotomy.
The constant dichotomy. And we believe that teaching without scholarship is sterile and unproductive.
Absolutely.
And all of us need to subject our teaching to constant
scrutiny, yes, certainly. Well, thank you, Dr. Dunbath.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice to have you in the
Thank you.
studio.